So I made a poll on my community tab and I asked you on what guide should I make so I could fix your skill issue. And 50% of you picked surgery. And that was the perfect answer because most of you go through guides that are either too long or hard to understand or just teaches you how to blindly click buttons without actually teaching you how to do proper surgery. And that is what makes those guides different from this video. Number 1, this is not a profit video. Number 2, I'm not gonna be teaching my ladies. Number 3, this is just basic surgery and nothing more. Number 4, I'm not gonna be teaching you how to get just basic Growtopia surgery, okay? Nothing more, nothing less. This is the surgery UI, more commonly known as user interface. This is where you do your surgery. If you didn't know, you need a player standing or sleeping on a hospital bed, wrench them, and then do your surgery. Or you can simply use something like Surge Ease or Train Ease. Well, the purpose of Train Ease is to actually help you how to learn surgery. I know there's a lot of things right here and there that you don't understand and you don't know what in each and every single word is about and what they all mean. But the first common step in surgery is to use a surgical ultrasound. Given if you don't see anything intimidating in your UI, such as your patient is bleeding or your patient's heart stopped, or your patient's fever is climbing. So commonly in surgery, it doesn't tell you what your patient's sickness is until you use an ultrasound. But if it's something like nose job, if it shows what it needs, what its problem is, you don't need to click on ultrasound. Ultrasound is just for figuring out what sickness you're gonna be trying to cure. So you know how you have fever and you use a thermometer to check what your temperature is? That is the same with Growtopia surgery, except you want to make sure that your patient's temperature is always below 100. To be precise, 98.6 degrees Celsius. If your patient's fever goes over 110 degrees Celsius, your patient is gonna fucking die because of infection. So what do you need? You need 2 tools, the surgical lab kit and the surgical antibiotics. The surgical lab kit, well, looks like a kit, and the surgical antibiotics looks like drugs. Just remember what they look like and reference it to real life or some funny shit. So, what to do if your patient's fever is climbing? First, you open the surgical lab kit to gain access to the surgical antibiotics, then keep using surgical antibiotics. The lab kit is your key to getting access to surgical antibiotics because your surgical antibiotics won't show in your tool tab without clicking on the lab kit. A mistake that players often make is that they forget to bring their patient's temperature down to 98.6. Some surgeons are like, what the hell, I've already cured this world throat issue and why is it not done? That is because your temperature is still probably at 100 or above 100. Even though your patient's fever is not climbing, you still need to bring it down to 98.5 to save your patient fully. Otherwise, you're stuck there wondering in confusion, why are you even existing? Next is the status. There are 2 common statuses, awake and unconscious. As the status name suggests, it determines whether your player or your patient is awake or sleeping. You know in surgery how they put their patients to sleep before surgery? That's the same with Growtopia surgery. Of course, you don't want to be opening your patient's skull open wide while they're awake, right? I mean, that's common sense. Always put your patient to sleep first before doing any scalping or cutting or any other risky procedure. It's a matter of common sense. To do that, you need a surgical anesthetic. It's basically like a mask. It's like an oxygen supply that puts the patient to sleep. At one point, their status may say that the patient is waking up, and when you see that, immediately use surgical anesthetic. Because if your patient wakes up, they're gonna scream in pain. Well, that's not an actual feature in game, but it is bad if your patient awakens while in the middle of a surgery. I'm gonna explain later. There's a thing called skill fails. You might be thinking, heartbeat, heart pulse, here, here. Nah, it's all about blood. You'd usually see strong, steady, weak, extremely weak, and then your patient dies. Your patient's heart needs blood to keep them alive. So if they're losing blood, their heart pulse will get weaker and weaker the more blood they use. So in this case, if you see this message that your patient is slowly losing blood, you use either surgical clamps or surgical stitches. What's the difference between surgical clamps and surgical stitches? There is no difference between surgical stitches and surgical clamp. They basically share the same purpose for this case. But surgical clamps is a much cheaper alternative to surgical stitches when something like this happens. Then in case your patient's pulse is around weak, even after using surgical clamps or surgical stitches, give them blood by using surgical transfusion. Keep giving your patient blood until it's at least steady. Well, this isn't really a life-threatening thing. It's usually clean or unsanitary, but according to Wiki, it increases your patient's chances of getting infection more frequently. So that means the events of your patient's fever climbing is very likely if your patient's operation site is unsanitary. To clean it, use surgical antiseptic. It has an A on its item. So if you see an A, that is surgical antiseptic. This is the part that most players find hard to understand in surgery. Basically, what an incision is the amount of surgical scalpels used on a patient. Something like this is a surgical scalpel. I know that this is a kitchen knife, but I do not care. I don't need your opinion. The surgical scalpel is used to cut your patient's body open. Keep pressing the surgical scalpel until you see the fix it button, which looks like a hand. The fix it button is not a surgical tool, but rather a button that will fix your patient's problem. For example, for a brain tumor, it needs at least 5 surgical scalpels to cut the brain open and get the tumor out by pressing fix it. Once you click the fix it button and your patient is cured of the disease or illness or from the problem, you use surgical stitches. The pattern is simple: surgical scalpels, fix it, and then surgical stitches. When you use a surgical scalpel, it decreases the number of incisions that there are. Just keep clicking until your incision count is 0. Once you've dropped it to 0, congratulations, you've done your surgery. Well, for your reference, here are the following diseases, illnesses, and problems that require surgical scalpels. At this point, I think you just need your common sense to figure out what needs cutting and what doesn't need cutting. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be using surgical scalpel to cut through your patient's skull just to fix fever. Am I right? The next one are the bones. You often don't see them in the user interface unless you click the surgical ultrasound. There are 2 types of bones: broken bones and shattered bones. So the procedure is simple. Use surgical pins on shattered bones and it will convert the shattered bones to broken bones, and then use surgical splints to fix broken bones. When you see this message, immediately use surgical sponge. If you leave that message for too long, it will end up looking like this. You'll only be left with a surgical sponge, and it will block you from using any surgical tool until you use a surgical sponge. That is how it is. When your patient's heart stops, immediately, your first step is to use a surgical defibrillator. So what is a skill fail? It is basically a system designed within surgery that gives you a chance in failing. When you press a surgical tool, there's a chance that that surgical tool won't get through the patient. Instead, you fail. Is there a way to counter that? Well, yes, there is. For starters, you want to buy and consume tea. Tea will reduce your chances of getting skill fails. If you're quite a rich guy like me, you could buy these following items. They will also reduce your chances of getting skill fails. Take note, the lower your surgeon skill is, the higher the chances of getting skill fails will be. Now, what is a surgery skill level? Well, as the name suggests, it's your level in surgery. Every time you complete a surgery on a player or on a surgery, you'll get one skill level.
Anyway, that's all. If you want to try Growtopia Surgery out yourself, you could go to growtopiasurgery.xyz or use the following Discord bots, the Growstocks bot or the Sinister bot. You can find them in a lot of different Growtopia Discord servers. And if you want to see me do hands-on surgery in action, you can click the video right here. Anyway, I've been working on this video for 3 weeks already, so make sure you subscribe.